Alright, so this is personality. This is the second video. It's covering reading 484 to 490. This is looking at the Neo-Freudian and the psychodynamic approach. It's going to look at assessing one's unconscious, so how can you test one's unconscious? And then it's going to, at the end, evaluate the overall thoughts on the psychoanalytical perspective. Okay, so first let's talk about this Neo-Freudian term. Neo-Freudian are kind of extensions to the original Freudian theory. It's kind of like new Freudian theories. So Freud's ideas were controversial, however, they attracted many followers. These pioneering psychoanalysis and others were now called Neo-Freudians. So I kind of see it as new Freudians. All accepted the common ideas of the unconscious. They all believed that shaping personality occurs in childhood. They believed in the dynamics of anxiety and also believed in the defense mechanisms. However, things that were different than Freud is they veered away from, they placed more emphasis on the conscious mind's role in interpreting experiences and coping with the environment. And they also doubted that sex and aggression were all consuming motivations. They tended to emphasize more on loftier motives and social interactions. So these people are going to place more motives on why we have the personality we do based upon social interactions versus sexual drives. Okay, so the important Neo-Freudians we need to know are Alfred Adler, Karen Horney, and Carl Jung are the big three that you need to know. You need to know who they are and their big ideas. Okay, so Karen Horney and Alfred Adler, both of these agreed with Freud that the childhood is important. They believe that childhood social, not so much sexual tensions, but social tensions are crucial for personality formation. First one I'm going to talk about is Adler. Adler proposed the idea of the inferiority complex. He thought that himself struggled to overcome childhood and illness and accidents, and he believed that much of our behavior is driven by efforts to conquer those childhood feelings of inferiority. He's kind of knocked down. He had a lot going on. Okay, and he felt like he never maybe was good enough, and he believed that if you try and overcome that, okay, you can kind of create the person that you are. So childhood struggles to overcome power and to strive for power, to overcome issues of inferiority and low self-esteem. He looked at the inferiority complex. He thought that if you have an inferiority complex, you have this complex that you're inadequate and you're insecurity. So here's this idea of inferiority complex. Inferiority, you have feelings that can be based on your physical problems and your need to compensate. So they start feeling inferior as a child because you're small, and your self-awareness plays a major role in that personality. Okay. Karen Horney, she worked with Adler. Okay, she believed in social aspects of childhood growth. She believed that children struggle to overcome helplessness and anxiety. She believed to strive for love and power. And a big thing that she discredited was Freud's idea of penis envy, that women want to be like men and they want men's power. Okay, that's not so much, she believed that that's not so much the case. Okay, so you have Karen Horney and Alfred Adler here. Alfred Adler states the individual feels at home in life and feels his existence to be worthwhile just so far as he is useful to others and is overcoming feelings of inferiority. And then she stated the view that women are infantile and emotional creatures and as such incapable of responsibility and independence is the work of the masculine tendency to lower self-respect. Okay, Carl Jung, a little bit on Carl Jung, is similar to Freud in that he believed in the unconscious nature drives out our behaviors. He did not discuss the sexuality portion. He believes that we all have a collective unconscious. So his big idea was we're born with this collective unconscious that you and I both share. It's inherited. We pass it down. Okay, so our view of, let's say, somebody who is like powerful, a knight, you're going to view somebody like a man. the part of our unconscious that is inherited and common to all members of a species. We have a common reservoir of images from our past that we all share. Jung stated that the collective unconscious explains why for many people spiritual concerns are deeply rooted and why many people in different cultures share different myths, because we inherit these maybe spiritual myths of things. Today's psychologists discredit the idea of inheriting certain ideas, that we're not born with this collective reservoir that everyone has. Carl Jung, from the living fountain of instinctual flows everything that is creative, hence the unconscious is the very source of the creative impulse. So we inherit many of our thoughts. The psychoanalytical perspective today, Freud died in 1939. Some of his ideas are still incorporated into the psychodynamic theory. Most do not believe sex impacts one's personality. They do not go around classifying people as oral, anal, or phallic when you go to a therapist. What they do assume is that much of our mental life is unconscious, that we often struggle with our inner conflicts among our wishes, fears, and values, and that our childhood experiences shape our personality, and that the ways we become attached to others. Assessing the unconscious. Here's the second part of the video. So assessing is testing. So how are we going to test somebody's unconscious nature? Tools for assessing personality is different for each of the different theories. So sometimes you're going to be able to take a objective test. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Psychoanalysis needs to reveal the hidden conflicts and impulses. Freud believed that free association and dream interpretation could reveal the unconscious. What's going on? Explain. Objective tests, for example, true or false, like I said, would not reveal much about how somebody is feeling. How are you feeling today? Great. Well, what does that really reveal about your unconscious nature? Nothing. So testing the unconscious, they came up with projective tests, and there's two different projective tests, the Rorschach test and the TAT, or the thematic apperception test. What projection tests do is they aim to provide the psychological x-ray by asking test takers to describe an ambiguous stimulus or tell us a story about a picture. So what does this mean? And then they tell a story about the picture, and what they believe that picture may show is something that's kind of a goal of other humans, or what they really feel about certain situations, because they're describing how they essentially feel through that picture. So the test delves into the unconscious nature of an individual. They may ask, what do you see when looking at this image? Project the meaning behind them. They are subjectives. They're very open for interpretation. They lack reliability. You may have different results each time. Maybe one day you see a picture, you reveal this. Another day you see something else. The validity is oftentimes they're misdiagnosing, because you think that you're interpreting something about a test, and it doesn't necessarily interpret what the individual is feeling. So evaluating personality from our unconscious requires projective tests. The thematic apperception test. Henry Murray came up with the TAT test. They were giving the subjects a picture that is ambiguous. They can have several meanings, and ask them what is occurring. What is the storyline? Their answers reveal the manifest content, the storyline of what's taking place. They also they have these pictures have meaning behind it. So what you kind of saw with Freud, what is the meaning behind a picture? So here's a young boy looking at a woman crying. They may ask, what do you see? If the boy reveals that he sees his mother crying, very upset about maybe the father dying. Well, maybe this is revealing what the little boy is experiencing at home. This clinician presumes that the hopes, fears, and interests expressed in the boy's description of a series of ambiguous pictures can tell what his inner feelings are really experiencing. Is it really always, like we kind of talked about before, valid? Well, no, the little boy could have just watched a movie about what he experienced, and that's why he's explaining that picture, versus what's really occurring in his unconscious nature. Again, here's another little boy sitting. If somebody gives you an example of they are dreaming about leaving this small city, and going off to a big town, maybe that's the thoughts that the individual sitting in the chair is having. The Rorschach inkblot test. Herman Rorschach came up with the inkblot test. This is one of the most widely used projective tests. Herman, as a child, would drop ink on sheets of paper, and him and his friends would try to describe what they saw. A set of 10 inkblots are usually designed to identify people's feelings when they're asked to interpret what they see in these inkblots. So here is an example of the inkblot test. The Rorschach test is a projective test. People tell what they see in a series of systematical inks. So who use this test are confident that the interpretation of ambiguous stimuli will reveal unconscious aspects of the test taker's personality. Others use the icebreaker or to supplement other information. Critics of the ink blot test, some clinicians believe it reveals a lot about the individual. Some people believe it can drive aggressive behaviors. Some people believe it is too vague and not enough research to prove that it's valid. Okay, so evaluating the overall psychoanalytical approach, we're going to look at contradictory evidence from modern research. We're going to talk about repression. Is it good to repress thoughts? And then Freud's science behind his theory. First one, contradictory evidence from modern research, looking at Freud. A lot of people argue that this psychoanalytical approach is not backed by biological science, DNA evidence. It's very subjective. However, many say that for the time period before we had all this science and research, he did a good job at insight on human behavior, that if we kind of talk about people's feelings, it does reveal a lot about information. Developmental psychologists argue that the development is lifelong. Okay, you don't stop after childhood. However, Freud at this point in time argued that many people experience what they experience in terms of development mostly in childhood. Freud underestimated peer influence. He never talked about peers, his friends, the social setting, which has a great influence we see in today's society. Many researchers doubt the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. Okay, kids really don't have those aggressive thoughts about their parents. And then dream theories have also been disputed due to the lack of evidence to support his theories. There's no evidence that supports that these dream theories actually take place. Just because you're dreaming this doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually having these thoughts. Repression, a myth. Looking at various cases, some argue that highly traumatic memories are not repressed. So he really believed that we repress a majority of what we experience, even though Freud believes they're stored away. However, research is uncovering that people uncover stressful conditions often. They often remember those stressful. Even though they lack the specific details, often people don't repress as much as Freud believed. So do we really repress memories? And that's kind of just an open question that I'm asking. And then Freud's ideas as scientific theory. What is the most serious problem with Freud? It does not provide enough scientific support to predict behaviors. It explains behaviors after the fact of what has happened, but struggles to predict on what will happen next. So to recap, we looked at the Neo-Freudians. Make sure you know the 3 Neo-Freudians we discussed. It talked about the 2 different ways of assessing. Then it talked about some criticisms of the approach.